Welcome in to the Mile High Hoops podcast here on Denver Sports on YouTube and everywhere else you might find us. We appreciate you watching. Today, we are wrapping up David Adelman's introductory press conference for the Denver Nuggets. AP and I were in the building yesterday for that. I think we both had some different takeaways and some feelings based off of that. I didn't think anything was too shocking or too stunning from what I heard. I thought David overall gave a pretty good performance, said a lot of things that needed to be said, and said things that I wanted to hear him say. But there were some things that stuck out, particularly to some parts of the fan base, AP.
Yeah, and we'll get into that throughout the course of the show. I've got some big picture thoughts on David Adelman as a whole. Like, I was personally impressed with how he handled himself, carried himself yesterday at the press conference. Not that I was ever, like I've told you, asked me, a handful of times after the season and even during the playoffs, of like, do you think David Adelman won the job? And I always said that if David Adelman ended up being the Nuggets head coach, I'd be fine with it. And I got some confirmation, at least my personal beliefs, that he will do a good job from that press conference yesterday as well. But yeah, a lot to talk about. He had some thoughts on pace of play. He had some thoughts on conditioning. Josh Kroenke had some thoughts on culture within the building. And we'll talk about it here on the show today. But what stood out to you first? Like, what was your biggest takeaway from David Adelman yesterday?
Yeah, I think he kind of doubled down on a lot of what Josh said a couple weeks ago or I guess a week ago, with internal development, but they're not going to say no to external options. Obviously, it's not David's job to look externally. It's David's job to see what he is given and try to make the best out of that. So I think having the mindset of, I'm going to do whatever it takes to develop Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, Jalen Pickett, Zeke Naji, Deron Holmes is probably the right approach from David Adelman. I thought some of the stuff about getting back to Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic's two-man game, something we've talked about on this podcast, and maybe slowing down the pace to be more effective on offense, because that'll translate better to the playoffs. I thought that was pretty smart. I think he made some good points about the fact that he had time to implement some defensive stuff because it was so needed going to the playoffs, but he really couldn't focus on his offensive system. And granted, he is the offensive coordinator, or was the offensive coordinator, so I don't know how much his offense is going to differ from the one we've seen. But even in the games he's coached, when stepping in for Malone or in this short stint, we have seen him do different things on offense than Malone was willing to try. So I have some faith. I have some confidence that David's going to approach this the right way. And overall, I think his point about organizational cohesion is correct, given where the Nuggets were. I don't think it's a culture problem. I think it's a cohesion problem and getting everyone on the same page. And secondarily, on top of that, just making sure when that cohesion bit comes into play, that everyone's aligned on what the goals are for the regular season. And I think that just hearing Josh talk about it over and over, and what we've said on this podcast over and over, it makes a lot of sense where they're going to be at.
Yeah, and I think to kind of trickle back to your point about the offense and like implementing things and this and that, like, I don't know. My takeaway is there's some stuff that he wants to try to spice up or change or alter, with the offense, and it's going to take them an off season. And honestly, I mean, he talked about how offense, you need live game action. Like, you can only do so much in practice. You can only do so much in shoot around. So I'm expecting the Nuggets offense. I think a lot of it has to do with what they have personnel wise, adding a body or two. But I think we'll see some real time installation of some new schemes and concepts on offense from David Adelman, which obviously you want to trust in because he's an offensive guy. And I think one of the big things that I took away is I think he's approaching this with not the job, but like how he's going to handle the players with a very blue collar approach. Like, he wants the guys to put in the work. Like, he talked about conditioning and showing up in better shape. And, one thing that you and I have talked about, I believe, and that I've heard is, there was maybe some frustration in and around the building of how certain players were treated, by coaches, or just the overall dynamic, like with star treatment. And I think we all agree that Nikola Jokic deserves a star treatment. This wasn't about Joker, but like, you kind of put Joker here, and then I think everybody else, at least from what I was getting from David Adelman, will be treated equally. Maybe that wasn't the case before. So I think, and I tweeted this out yesterday, I think he has enough relationship equity with the players that not only do they respect him, but he can challenge them and bring new ideas to the table and say things without, pissing them off or, aggravating them or whatever. So it's going to be an interesting tango to see how David Adelman, tries to get more out of guys like Michael Porter Jr., tries to get more out of guys like Jamal Murray. But that was another big takeaway for me is I thought he commanded the room well yesterday. And I think that'll trickle down to the locker room as well.
We talked about it on the show about how Malone had just grown thin on some players. It just worn thin. And it wasn't that he was a bad coach. It's just 10 years in the NBA. And you look at the progress of this team. He took over where he could have been the dad for these guys, right? Like he was literally an elder statesman with the veteran NBA experience. And he was talking down to them like he was their boss. Now, David Adelman is not that older than some of these players at this point. And I think he is going to talk to most of them as peers. And I think that's the right way to approach it, given how professional a lot of the players in the Denver Nuggets organization are. At the exact same time, David Adelman is preaching the fact that they need to be more professional. And I think, to me, when you work in a professional setting and you are a professional, a lot of it comes down to the fact, AP, of like, we are peers. We are all working towards the same goal. I do not need to talk down to you and approach you like you don't know what you're doing. So I think that's the right approach. And it's all a part of this plan, in my opinion, with Josh Kroenke talking about we don't need a cultural reset. Josh Kroenke, we do not need a cultural reset. And to me, David Adelman is the perfect middle ground of it's going to be a big change for the Denver Nuggets moving forward that Michael Malone is not the head coach and David Adelman is. I personally believe that. I want your thoughts on that in a second. But it also isn't so much of a change. It's the nuclear option, which I don't think they need to press because I do believe they are close. I do believe that this cultural, situation in the Nuggets organization, it's not as good as it was 2-3 years ago, but it certainly hasn't eroded like I've seen with the 2019 Colorado Rockies or the 2017 Colorado Buffaloes, where it all falls apart. I think there are some issues, there are some cracks, and David Adelman is a good solution because he knows where the cracks are and he knows how to plug them. So that's where I fall. Big change, but not a reset, and that reset is not needed. I agree with Josh.
Yeah, and I believe that answer from Josh was in response to the question that you and I had talked about of why did you hire a head coach before you hired a general manager? And that was kind of, to your point, what he had to say on that front. And I think, something else that was revealed to me to kind of bounce off your point that you just made is David spoke about the willingness and the desire of the guys when he took over as interim coach to lock in. Right. Like I forget exactly how he worded it, but, he said something along the lines of like where the season was going, when I came in and did the thing, like it felt like a breath of fresh air, like some renewed energy was kind of the vibe that I was getting from David Adelman, which I think shows you the amount of respect that he commands amongst the players in that locker room, which is absolutely critical. And I agree with you, man. Like, you and I were in that Rockies building, right? Like we saw that. I think you used the word erosion. I think that's a great word to use. Like we saw the deterioration of that team over time. Now it happened pretty quickly for the Rockies after making the playoffs in 2018. But I didn't get that vibe. And I don't think there's a player like Russ is kind of the new guy on the block, I guess you could say, to a certain extent, and Russ is going to be Russ. So let's take him out of the equation. But like the core members, Aaron Gordon, Christian Brown, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Nikola Jokic, I never once really sensed a fracture in their belief and their willingness and desire to play with each other and play at a high level. I think it's just up to David Adelman to continue to motivate them.
Yeah, it just at times felt like maybe not the best workplace and that not everyone was enjoying their time at work.
Got stale.
This year. Right. But like that hadn't happened before. And we talked about it on a couple of these pods where like stuff has been leaking and that hadn't happened before. Like there has been a crack. There has been a fracture. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think it's like this huge erosion. Like, I don't know. I call out Josh Dover again because that's my new thing on this podcast, apparently. And it's fine because Josh's my guy. But, dude, like, why are we trading everyone and everything? They just went to the second round, game 7 for the second year in a row. Do you know how many teams in the NBA would kill to be in this position? And I'm not saying it's good enough when you have the best player in the world. I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying. But it's not like the Nuggets are that far off. And that's where I think a lot of people are like freaking out about this thing. Like, oh my God, they just fired their coach and their GM. Yeah. And they still almost beat the Thunder, who are about to win the NBA championship. Like they are so close. And the question to me is not how close they are or if this is a fracture or not. It's just how do you raise your ceiling? That's the next step. And to me, in hiring David Adelman and the things we heard David Adelman talk about in terms of development, in terms of what he's going to focus on in improving the Nuggets, it's very simple. And those simple fixes are all the Nuggets need. They have the big stuff figured out. They are great when they are all together.
Yeah. And, Josh said as much, he only answered, I think, 2 or 3 questions yesterday. I mean, it was the David Adelman show, but, he felt like the series against Oklahoma City was lost when they blew the 8-point lead going in the fourth quarter in games 4 and games 5, which is something that you and I have talked about a lot. And, hindsight's always 2020, but now that we've had a little bit of time to kind of digest and take a step back from the season, I mean, Memphis won 0 games against Oklahoma City. Minnesota, the big bad Timberwolves, won 1. And they
classic gentleman's sweep game if we just put everything into game 3.
Exactly. And so, I know it's frustrating and you hate to lose and this and that. And MPJ was banged up. And Russell Westbrook was Russell Westbrook. There was a lot of different injuries going around, but the fact that they took Oklahoma City to 7 games with everything going on top of firing your head coach with 3 games left, on top of firing your GM with 3 games left, I think shows you, to use that red zone analogy again, I mean, they just got to figure out a way to get the ball in the end zone. They are not that far off right now. And I understand that, maybe Nuggets fans, I put out the thing on our social media yesterday about the Paul Pierce throwing out, do you trade MPJ for DeMar DeRozan? And I understand that there's a lot of Nuggets fans that are just sick and tired of MPJ. There's a subsect of Nuggets fans that, are annoyed with Jamal Murray. But the reality of the situation is, to your point, Jake, they were 1 game away from being in the Western Conference Final. And Oklahoma City's about to stomp Indiana in 5 is my prediction in the NBA Finals. So, look, you have to worry because Oklahoma City's not going anywhere. San Antonio's coming up. We know the Western Conference is difficult, but Denver is close, man. And I understand that maybe it's not the sexy thing to do to go out there and get a star, to get a Kevin Durant. Not that it's going to happen, but you have to kind of stick to the process. And I also think Josh had a really good point when he said, the vision that my dad and I had sent out 10 years ago, right? And they've kind of accomplished everything they've wanted to accomplish. Now we're kind of in this finite black or white. Did you win the championship? If you did, great. If you didn't, it's considered a failure. It's hard to win. Denver's not far off. I'm okay with them staying the course, and I'm okay with DA as head coach.
The whole thing for the Nuggets in 2023 is we don't skip steps. Why are we all of a sudden going to skip the steps right now when that was proved to work? And we saw the other team skip steps and they all fell flat on their faces trying to do it. It just doesn't make much sense to me to do that. So in David Adelman, it's another step you're taking. You've grown David Adelman as a coach. You helped produce him, and now you are going to reap the benefits of a guy who I think is going to be a very good NBA coach. Do I think it's going to be here? I'm not sure. This is a very tough and challenging situation to walk into for David Adelman, but he already took over the most challenging situation I've ever seen in the NBA and succeeded with flying colors. So I've got some faith in David Adelman, but on this front, David is someone that believes, in my estimation, based off the things he talked about, what Julian Strother told me yesterday, which is they have enough in that locker room to win an NBA championship. Now, Josh Kroenke and Nikola Jokic haven't explicitly said it, but each of them basically said, we do not have the team to win an NBA championship. Now, with Jokic, I think some translation is needed. As always, it's his second language. And he was basically saying, hey, we didn't win, so we don't have enough to win. That makes sense. But he wasn't saying, I need you to go out and get somebody. He's saying we need to be better at this, that, and the other. He wasn't looking outside, in my opinion. He could have been looking outside. And Josh, by doubling down on Jokic's take and agreeing with him, to me, Josh was also saying, you know what? The door is open for outside acquisitions, and we're going to keep our mind open. But I'm with Jokic in the sense that we can't win this year because we didn't win. So when you see that quote that says Josh and Jokic both think that the door is open to external improvements, I didn't read that the same way a lot of people did in the headline. AP, where are you on that one?
No, I'm with you. And I think it's a matter of getting more out of the roster. And I'll talk about Julian Strother here in just a moment, because I thought it was pretty telling that he was sitting there front row, like Jamal was there as well in the back.
Jalen Pickett was there, by the way, too.
Yeah, I saw that after the fact. I didn't see him there, but I saw some pictures floating around on social media that he was indeed there. But, it's actually funny you bring that up. I was hanging out with my girlfriend last night, and she asked me the exact same question because she was reading our work online at denversports.com. So she's like, well, Julian Strother said this, but Josh Kroenke agrees with Joker about this. Explain that to me. And I think the big thing here is look, there will be a new face or two. Like there will be maybe a familiar face in a Bruce Brown or Gary Harris, right? We talked about that on the last show. But they have got to figure out a way to extract more out of what they have. And honestly, the more that I think about it with David Adelman compared to Michael Malone and the decision to go with DA is I think Josh Kroenke believes that David Adelman will be able to develop these guys at a more rapid pace and build them up instead of tearing them down like a guy like Michael Malone, who loyal to a fault to his veterans was Michael Malone. And so I think David Adelman in his seat is saying, yeah, like Julian Strawther can up his ante. Yes, Julian Strawther can play better defense. He can shoot the ball at a higher clip. Peyton Watson can learn how to finish and continue to hit the corner three at a decent level and play defense. So it's crazy, Jake, but how far the Denver Nuggets go next season outside of adding a player on the mid-level taxpayer exception, it's going to come down to the internal growth and development of guys like Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, and Jalen Pickett in particular, with Pickett in the regular season. Take the load off some of the other guys.
They made these bets 3 years ago when they made these trades. They can't get out of them now.
That's a good point. Double down. You got to double down now.
That's the only way. Like if they try to get out of it, you're losing value. There's no point to do it. You're wasting a year of Jokic's prime, whatever you want to say, if you try to get out of it. But on the Bruce Brown front, similar to David Adelman, AP, similar to David Adelman, he kind of bridges the gap of let's make a change because we know we need a change, but we don't think the things are as broken as the outside world does. Bruce Brown kind of fits that narrative. Aside from the fact that Bruce left and got his bag. That's what we all knew Bruce was going to do, despite him at the championship parade saying, I want to come back. We've all said things while we've had a few, right? I get it, Bruce. So same for Michael Malone, who said that. Bruce Brown's had 2 bad years. Indiana, Toronto, New Orleans. I can't fault Bruce for those 2 rough years because he signed a $20 million deal to play for the Indiana Pacers, who have now gone to 2 straight conference finals and are likely going to the NBA finals. He thought he was going to be on a team that was going to be competitive. Mid-season, he gets traded for one of the better players in the league, Pascal Siakam, to no man's land in Toronto. They have a bunch of players with positions that don't fit. Gets traded a year later for another good player, Brandon Ingram, to New Orleans with another team that is just lost at sea with a bunch of players in positions that don't fit. And yet still, even in a decrease of minutes, Bruce Brown over the last 2 years is still averaging like 9 points a game, about the same amount of rebounds, and just a touch under his assist numbers from the Nuggets. His three-point shooting numbers have come down, obviously, because he's not getting the Jokic assist. We know that. So at 29 years old, do I think Bruce Brown has all of a sudden regressed in age 27 and 28 to the point where I don't know if I want to pay that guy the mid-level exception? No. To me, Bruce is a guy that if you need to use the mid-level exception to get him in here and you can't just use a minimum contract, I'm doing it. In a great world, hopefully Bruce comes back for the minimum and you can get Luke Kennard in here for the mid-level exception and you can get everyone, right? And we can throw a parade. But even Bruce Brown alone, and what he does in terms of his position versatility, playing 1 through 4, his 3-and-D ability, his ability to play a backup point guard, his ability to play next to Jamal Murray as well, his relationship with Nikola Jokic, his relationships within the league, by the way, he's one of the more respected players I've come across, would be such a boon for the Nuggets that they really need to find a way to work that relationship to try and get Bruce back here. Now, it's not just the Nuggets, it's Bruce as well. Like both sides have to come together, but the hint is from both sides that it seems like this would be another perfect marriage.
Yeah, and it takes 2 to tango, right? But I mean, we would think that the Nuggets are willing to engage in that dance, but I also think Bruce Brown, just from what we've seen, is also willing to engage in that conversation. I mean, you talk about what he said at the parade. You see him, sitting courtside during a playoff game, just going into the locker room after the game, as if he was still a player and literally picking the chin up of some of his former teammates. And, there's him wearing the Avalanche hat on social media. There's him within 20 minutes of the David Adelman news coming out, reposting that on social media. And I just think the camaraderie and the chemistry that he was able to develop with these guys will go a long way. You'll get more from Bruce Brown than I think you can get from a new guy on the block, that hasn't played with them. I mean, he's just such a perfect fit. And I think the other part of this too with Bruce Brown is your point about, playing in New Orleans, playing in Toronto. I mean, heck, dude, like I'd be checked out too. I got my money. This team isn't going anywhere. Like, I'm not trying to say you don't give full effort, but like, it's easy to, look out the window and daydream a little bit. So if Bruce Brown at 29 years old was able to come back, I think he'd be a great addition for this Denver Nuggets team. And to your point, like, would it be nice to get him on the minimum? Absolutely. But you just gave the mid-level exception to Dario Saric, who did like literally nothing. Like, took up space on this bench this season, didn't play after like the first 10 or 15 games for the most part, except in garbage time. So you basically took the mid-level exception, didn't do anything with it this last year. You bring in Bruce Brown on that same type of deal, you know what you're getting. And that's the guy that was a key cog in a championship team. To me, it makes too much sense, but we'll see where that domino ends up falling.
I think people overestimate and over-remember how good Bruce was, just because he had an outsized impact during the playoffs, particularly during the finals when Porter was struggling. I don't think Bruce coming here is like going to completely change the fortunes in itself of this Nuggets team. I still think they need to do some other stuff. But even on that, they just need more role players. And Bruce is literally the best role player that the Nuggets have had in this era, besides Aaron Gordon, if you want to count him as a role player.
Versatile, to your point, can play 1 through 4, can score, can defend, like can do so much for you and just be a
finish at the rim, which no one seems to be able to do.
Strother can't. I mean, we're going back to the internal. Strother needs to work on that. The outside shooting as well is a bit inconsistent. If Peyton Watson can finish, I mean, he's going to be a heck of a player. He's a heck of a talent. You've just got to mold that into someone that you can rely on a game in and game out basis. So yeah, we'll see where the chips fall with a guy like Bruce Brown. Another thing with Bruce Brown, like
on Dario, I need to put my tinfoil hat on for a second.
Okay.
Why didn't he play at all in the second half of the season or in the playoffs or in any blowouts?
I literally have no idea. Like, did he just piss Malone off that much? Like, I tell me, give me your theory.
Okay, so we heard the rumor pretty early on, midway through the season, like early on for this type of rumor to come up, that Real Madrid was interested in signing him, right? Well, if he knew he was going to sign a contract with Real Madrid and opt out of his money with the Denver Nuggets and take the money overseas, he needed to be healthy, right? So he wasn't going to play.
I see where you're going.
Nuggets, so maybe there was a little whisper agreement between the Nuggets and Dario's camp that says, all right, we're not going to get you hurt. Just show up to work, do your thing. And, both sides are going to shake their hands free of this, and you guys can go over to Europe and you're not going to get hurt, because that's the way the Nuggets get off the Dario contract. And that would be so huge for them this year if they can get off the Dario contract, because they're working like really tight spaces under that second apron. Which, by the way, if they sign the taxpayer mid-level exception with Bruce Brown, they're hard capped below the second apron. So they can't do anything to get into the second apron. So I don't know. It's not worth having like a 5-minute conversation about Dario, but I thought of it the other day.
Can we have a 5-minute conversation about David Adelman's comments about coming into the season with conditioning? Because I think you and I have differing opinions on that. And just to set the scene, I know we mentioned it, like Julian Strother was sitting in the front row, and I've got some thoughts on Julian, which I'll share here in a moment. Jamal Murray was in the back with a family member, I believe. And then Jalen Pickett, I didn't see him, but we saw on social media that he was there, I think was also hanging out in the back. But I thought David Adelman's comments were pretty pointed about coming into the season better, like physically and mentally, and just being in basketball shape. And he also said how getting out to a strong start as they did in 2023 when they won the championship gives you a little bit of padding, gives you a little bit more flexibility as the season goes along. I mean, if you come out here in your first 30 games, right, and you got 20 plus wins, you're feeling pretty good about, okay, like not that you want to take a night off, but it's like you got this random game in the middle of February, Jamal Murray's banged up, MPJ's banged up, like you can sit them. Like you don't have to like go all out, pedal to the metal like Denver did in the second half of the year post-trade deadline just because of where they were at in the standings.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point that David made about starting the season off, that the best teams start the season off better. The last 2 years, they've actually gotten off to pretty good starts, better than they did their championship season, by the way. And then they kind of fell apart a little bit, and then they both years went all out after the All-Star break. This year, they weren't as good, so the results weren't as good. Last year, we saw that. Like, they were amazing after the All-Star break. I agree with David Adelman that if the Nuggets can bank, 25 wins before 10 losses and they're rolling in mid-January and they're feeling good about themselves, I think that'll be so key for this team. But the question that David got asked that a lot of people are going to make a lot about which was a reporter out there who I think was asking this specifically about Jamal Murray because he saw Jamal Murray in the room, said, do guys need to come into the season in better shape? David said yes, but I don't think David was pointing that at Jamal Murray. I think the reporter was. I don't think David was, because if you look at the last two off seasons, they win the title, everyone's drinking, everyone's having a good time.
Right.
They earned it, they deserved it. They didn't have a regular off season. It was very short. Then last year, half the team is playing in the Olympics.
Half? Jamal, Joker,
who else? Vlatko and Dario played in the qualifiers. Like, that's part of the team. You had who else was in this? I mean, Aaron wanted to play, so he was like ready to go. And then I'm trying to think. There's one more I think that was in the Olympics. But basically, I mean, you have a 15-man roster. You have a third of the team. Okay, a third of the team was playing in the Olympics. Not a normal offseason. And granted, Jokic said that actually helped him play better, but I think that hurt Jamal Murray quite a bit. And that made his contract thing all the more weird. Like, every part of that was just a weird.
And he was hurt at some, like, leading up to the Olympics, right?
And when you don't have an extension signed, and this is something to keep in mind with Christian Braun, by the way, when you don't have an extension signed, you can't train as hard. You can't try to go as hard because you don't have that security of money. So I'm not saying Jamal came into the season in the right shape last year, but I'm saying I understand from a multitude of perspectives why multiple guys came into last season maybe not in the best shape possible. And I do think that the right approach is trying to not play their way into shape, but being in shape and then taking some time off throughout the regular season rather than taking that time off now and being, not in shape come October. So I think that's a really interesting perspective change. But I know you think that was pretty much pointed at Jamal.
I think so, just because, I mean, that's been a recurring theme with Jamal for years now, like predating the championship season. And I understand that he was working his way back from injury there, but it's like we've had this conversation about Jamal Murray for at least 3 or 4 seasons, it feels like. And like, to your point about like they have started well, in years past, but like, and I can't think of any games in the moment, but like I can remember some like Brooklyn, I think, was like within the first 10 games of the year, they had to go to double overtime to win that game against the Brooklyn Nets. Like it's like what they lack in conditioning and basketball readiness, they make up for with their natural talent. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, like they're great teams, but like if you want to be able to give yourself some leeway later on in the season, showing up in that basketball shape, and ready to go, I think is imperative. And like I hear what you're saying about, if you don't have a contract, this, that, the other, like it's also just being a pro. Like that's also what it comes down to. And I understand that you have to walk the line of like, well, I don't have a deal, so I don't want to burn myself out. But like there should like the thought of playing yourself into shape in the regular season like is crazy. Like when I got hired here, like you think I was getting myself in social media shape? Like, no, I hit the ground running. Like it's one of those things. And I know it's not apples to apples, but like when you're getting paid $1 gazillion, like the least you could do is show up and be ready to play come game one. Like I think this idea of we're going to take the first 20, 25 games to get into basketball shape, like, I don't know, like to me, that's just like, really? Like you have a whole offseason. And I understand last year with the Olympics is one thing, but I don't know. I don't like banking on raw talent to overcompensate for some things that you maybe did or didn't do in the offseason.
I understand that perspective. That's never been my take on where
my old man take.
Yeah, old man take. That's never been my take on where Jamal Murray's at. It just hasn't. I haven't seen it. Has he come into the seasons a little bit, not in the correct end of season shape, I guess, but like he's playing big minutes at the start of the season and he looked pretty decent. I think there's always been a flip that switches around mid-December where he turns into a different player. I don't know if that's just rhythm based. I don't know if that's shape based. I don't know. I'm not the Jamal Murray psychologist, although I might be the closest thing the Nuggets media has to that.
Well, the other thing is, Jake, like this is just who he is. Like take the conditioning out of like he's an up and down player at times. Like when he is on and he's up in the playoffs, I mean, you don't want to trade Jamal Murray for anybody, right? But like when he's down, that's when the overall roster construction, the flaws, really shine through because you rely so much on Jamal Murray to be that number 2 option next to Nikola Jokic. So conversation aside, I think we just kind of know who Jamal, like, I'm not surprised now at down Murray games. I'm not surprised when Murray puts up 13 points and is 1 of 6 from 3. Like, I've just kind of come to expect that. And I don't think that's on Jamal Murray or this, that, the other. Like, I just think it's hard to be really good every single game. Like, which is why, like, you're spoiled with a guy like Nikola Jokic, who's able to, be within spitting distance of a triple double every single time he takes the court. So, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that Jamal Murray's an inconsistent player. But again, to bring it back to roster construction, like, build your roster out accordingly to make up for when these lows eventually are going to happen.
Yeah, I'm trying to look it up now because the statistics on Anthony Edwards playoffs were really, really, really bad.
Yes, they were.
He scored quite a bit, but I'm just trying to see really quickly if I can do this, and maybe this is worth a show, but I don't think Jamal Murray was all that much worse than Anthony Edwards in the playoffs. Is kind of my.
I don't know what to make of Anthony Edwards, bro. What all right, disappointment. Sorry.
So we both are kind of on the same page. DA is focused on the right things. We learned not a ton, but some little hints at where the Nuggets are going to go. The big question remaining for the next little bit here is the GM before the coach before the GM. It seems to me that the Nuggets already have a plan in place for their general manager being hired, and that is coming imminently. Whether that's Ben Tenzer, the interim GM, or not. I have heard some things that, the Nuggets are sniffing around the Timberwolves organization.
Yeah.
And maybe not for Tim Connelly, but one of the people under him. So in my opinion, even if David was actually hired before the GM, I think their future GM candidates have already signed off or have been okay with the hiring of David Adelman. I think that we're making way too big of a situation out of this, because I think in the grown world, in the grown world, there are political situations that occur as proved by Booth versus Malone. But I think in this situation, I don't think it's going to turn into a whole thing, especially knowing what I do about David. I don't think he has the ego of a guy like Michael Malone that can turn something like this into a huge thing.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that, like, the potential candidates for GM, like, they might be more like draft, develop, analytical based. Like, it might not be a bigwig guy like Bob Myers who wants all the power and all the control. It might be a guy who says, okay, like, I'm cool with David Adelman. He'll do his thing. I'll do mine. And, cohesion was the big word that was used yesterday from DA of, like, you want to make sure that you're on the same page with philosophies, but, like, DA's responsibility is to win the game in front of him. And this new GM obviously is going to be watching the games and paying attention to the games, but he might be thinking about it of, like, scouting this player in the draft, like, almost, to make it like a Broncos comparison, like George and Sean Payton. Like, George Payton is known for his drafting, his like scouting and that type of stuff, whereas Sean Payton is an X's and O's offensive guy who, takes Bo Nix and takes him to the next level. So it might be that type of a dynamic where David Adelman, is very, very just focused on what he has at his disposal, and he lets his GM take care of the rest, as opposed to a guy like Malone and Booth who clashed heads of, should we trade this to get this? Should we draft Peyton Watson? Should we draft Julian Strother? So yeah, I don't read into that a ton. I just think, again, I'm expecting an internal candidate, or I'm expecting a name that not a lot of NBA fans are going to know right now.
Yeah, so the name from the Timberwolves organization, just to be blunt, is Matt Lloyd, who is the current general manager, working under as the number 2 behind Tim Connelly. So the 2 candidates for GM as of right now, Matt Lloyd, who worked with Tim Connelly. Matt Lloyd, by the way, who was in Orlando with David Adelman for 2 seasons. Matt Lloyd was the assistant general manager when David was on the staff. Or secondarily, another leading candidate seems to be Ben Tenzer, who has worked with David Adelman now for 8-9 years. So I don't think that we are going to get into the same situation as we did before. Now, I do push back a little bit on you with the GMs maybe wanting to draft and develop, and the coach wants to do this and that and the other. We just saw how that played out.
Yeah.
Except there were egos involved. But I do think there is a certain Broncos aspect to this where both sides can answer to Josh Kroenke if Josh is going to be more involved. Or perhaps if Matt Lloyd is the president of basketball operations or something like that, both sides are answering to Matt. And again, Matt's already worked with David. And David even talked about in his press conference, as kind of a hint, in my opinion, I've worked with a lot of people over the years in basketball, and I've cultivated a lot of different relationships. So I think they're ready for whatever's to come. And I think the Nuggets actually have a plan right now. We just don't publicly know it yet. And so they might have hired their coach before their GM, but I don't think that the GM was their GM candidates were precluded from the conversations. AP, you're going to be out of town starting here soon, so we're not going to see you we'll probably see you maybe one more time. But right now, if I asked you today, and I think we got your pick, but I want it in clip form right here, who's winning the NBA Finals?
Oh, it's the Oklahoma City Thunder in 5 games. Like, I saw their scoring differential at home. Look, they're the best team in the NBA. Like I know that pains a lot of Nuggets fans out there because they were so close to beating them in 7 games. I think Indiana's fun. I don't know what's going on with the Knicks. I think they're just kind of cooked in that series, to be honest with you. I'll put it this way. I would be shocked if the Oklahoma City Thunder do not win the NBA Finals.
I agree with you. And someone as, a person who is a Nuggets fan, for a long time, I was going, just please be someone from the East. I don't want to hear these Thunders fans and blah, blah, blah. This morning, my intrusive thought has been all morning, what if the Thunder winning this year is actually good for the Nuggets next year? Because teams coming off of a championship have that hangover, and no team in the last 5, 6, 7 years has won a championship and then gotten past the second round of the playoffs the next season. So what if the Thunder winning actually might be low key, a little bit of a good thing for the Nuggets? I don't know. So
I can see it.
I'm just throwing that out. Anyway, this is the Mile High Hoops podcast. He's Aniello Piro. I'm Jake Shapiro. Thank you for tuning in live today on the pod. We'll be back next week at some point for a show. We're expecting to hear from a new GM of the Denver Nuggets at some point. But for now, we've got the 23rd head coach in Denver Nuggets history. It's David Adelman.